Good morning. I'm Margie Manning, and I'm president of the Florida District Board of Trustees, and I'm so glad to see everybody gathered here in Orlando. From Orlando, we send greetings to Unitarian Universalists in the Southern region who are gathered in New Orleans, in Montgomery, and in Greensboro. 5 years ago, the district boards in the Southern region all were here in Orlando, where we discovered something amazing. We yearned for deeper relationship with each other, not for governance. About the same time, our Unitarian Universalist president, Reverend Peter Morales, was talking about new ways of connecting with each other to strengthen our relationships. Now that we're standing on the precipice of formalizing those new relationships and being in stronger connections with each other, we're so grateful to have Reverend Morales with us to help us realize how far we've come. Reverend Morales.
Thank you very much. And I want to begin with a kind of shout out to my colleagues who were at these different gatherings. Vale Wellers, I think, in New Orleans, and Mary Catherine Mornins in Montgomery, and Elizabeth Terry is in Greensboro. They're members of our stewardship and development staff that work with congregations on the congregational giving. So we've got you covered in every one of our locations this morning. It's great to be here. I have a shocking announcement to make to you. I don't like regionalization, I've discovered. Perhaps I should explain. I love what you're doing. And I realize more and more that regionalization sounds so cold and bureaucratic and government-like and technical that it doesn't capture what I think is happening, which is a rethinking of how do we organize ourselves to bring our values, our faith into action, and do the structures that we've had for some time still serve us. You know, at our best, Unitarian Universalists, if you look at our history and at what we're proud of in our history, it isn't about clinging to the past. It isn't about holding on to old forms. At our best, we've always been the people who ask, is there a better way? Are there new opportunities here? And so for me, this is really about what you said, Kathy, about the connections, about reimagining what's possible together. And I want to, beyond complimenting, really praise the people of this region because you have been the pioneers in this. It's now taking place all over the country. You are now really leaders in our movement in the way that you have not been before. This region is numerically is growing more than other regions in our country. You were pioneers in this new relationship, rethinking of what our covenant really means as we organize. And you've been leaders in reimagining also how we support together, how we use our resources to support our larger movement. And I want to say a few things this morning before we get into questions and answers, because that's really, I want us to have plenty of time for that. But I want to say a few things about the annual program fund and the gifting that has happened in the restructuring of the annual program fund here in the South. Because, again, to thank you for being pioneers and to acknowledge that while this program was done in careful consultation with leaders in our districts and across the region, that we at the association were surprised by some of the results of it. And even at a personal level, let me say that in sort of playing it back, and we were having a couple of meetings a few weeks ago to take a look at what happened. I realized that when the proposals came forward that I didn't ask some questions that I should have asked. That I assumed certain things, and that if we'd asked collectively, but ultimately it's my responsibility to ask, all right, have we prototyped this? Have we looked at what the different effects are? Let's sample some of these congregations. Let's really look into in more depth what the reaction is going to be and what the problems of implementation are going to be. I think we could have made it smoother. So I want to acknowledge that, and to say that in the way that one of the things that the gift that you've given to the rest of the movement is it's totally affecting how we're looking at extending this and reshaping the annual program fund for the rest of the country in the years to come. So praises to you for doing that. One of the real learnings about that, let me say, is we wanted something, obviously, consistent with our values that was fair and simple. And we're finding that fair is good and simple is good, but it's hard to do fair and simple simultaneously. That fair sometimes is complicated, and it's simple, real simple, as we've known with just doing something that's per member, isn't always fair. So we're having to look to measure, to balance these two values as we go forward. I think we thought it was going to be a little easier than that was. And with that, I know that you compile some questions, and I'd love to take those on, because I think that's going to be more useful for us. So why don't you take it away, Margie?
Start with this question from Peter Candice, who is at the UU congregation of the Low Country in Bluffton, South Carolina. Peter asks, is it hard to place an event in an historical perspective when it only happened 5 years ago? But I'll ask anyway. Would you please comment on the importance of the Orlando platform?
Well, sure. It's hugely important because it's a religious statement. It's a statement about core values and how we believe those values ought to play out in the world, rather than simply continuing with an arrangement. To look back at our history, and my first involvement with the association at the staff level some years back was as director of district services, which is now we call congregational life, which is a more accurate name for that. And in my dark moments, I said that if you hired a management consultant to look at how to organize across the country, and they recommended the system that we had, you could sue them for malpractice. Because what it was a kind of compromise at the time of the merger of the Unitarians and Universalists, of the state conventions and the others, and it was done kind of quickly, and it was a cumbersome kind of system. So it's really time. It really says something, I think, about our maturity as a faith and as an organization, that we're rethinking that and moving past that arrangement. And then there's another piece to it here that I think we really need to lift up, because one of the things I saw when I was director of district services, and at the time there were 20 districts, and went around, was how much effort of really good, dedicated Unitarian Universalists, how much effort went into the mechanics of governance and of trying to do the kind of budgeting at the district level and managing these funds that go back and forth between the UUA and that was not a very good use of the time of some very good people that they should have been, and would have found it much more rewarding to be involved in real ministry and other kinds of leadership in their areas. And so one of the costs of the way we've been doing things is the real human costs of asking people to do things that aren't terribly fulfilling or rewarding or effective.
Our next question comes from Lisa Cromer at Buckman Bridge UU Church, which is here in Florida in the Jacksonville area. I know you said you don't like the word regionalization, but this question asks, How are the regional...
I like what we're doing. Let me...
Yeah.
I
It's
really
the
like
word.
what we're doing, yeah. I'm just realizing that the word for me doesn't capture it. I wish we had a better word.
But how are the changes around what we're doing consistent with the UU commitment to congregational polity and to the democratic process?
I think it's completely consistent. I don't personally see any problem around congregational polity, and having been a member of a congregation and a parish minister for a number of years, I don't know how this would do anything that I felt compromised the meaningful independence that's intended in congregational polity. What it does is adds to that other side, which is the relationship side that we don't pay enough attention to, that I think holds us back as a movement. In the same way that individuals come together and can do things in a congregation that they couldn't do individually, and can grow in the ways they couldn't individually, the same thing happens and ought to happen across our movement in our congregation. So I don't see any problem at all, any conflict with congregational polity. Let me say a word or two about democratic process, because one of the things that I've observed, let me take it to a congregational level where we all have some experience. I used to ask in the congregation I served, which is a more, let's say that there is an issue, a significant issue, and that the leadership of the congregation, the board, and others attached study this issue, contact people who are very much involved with it, deliberate and get all the stakeholders together and come up with what they think is the best solution, versus having 16% of the congregation at a congregational meeting discuss it for a few minutes and vote on it, which is the more democratic process. Democracy is about discerning and doing the will of the people. It's not about voting. Tyrannical governments have votes all the time. We tend to confound something that we have a debate and then vote and think that's democracy. It isn't. It's a form of democracy without sometimes the content of it. So the key, and this is a constant struggle to make this new regionalization work well, is the communications. Are we really in touch with the needs and the aspirations of our people are? And are we responding to that? And that involves doing a whole lot of things. It involves a lot of listening, and it involves and finding different venues and making sure that everyone is represented, that marginalized people, that youth, and that everyone has had a voice in that process. That's what really makes it a democratic process.
Thank you.
That was a long answer to a short question.
In 2017, our General Assembly will be held in New Orleans. This question comes from Reverend Deanna Vandiver.
Am I hearing cheers out of New Orleans?
So Reverend Deanna Vandiver at the Center for Ethical Living and Social Justice Renewal in New Orleans asks, what is your vision for General Assembly 2017 in the Southern region in New Orleans?
Well, happily, it's more than 2 years away, so there's not. The initial thinking of it is that it's a natural place for a justice-focused GA, and the one we had in Phoenix was a real eye-opener for many of us. It's a natural venue, I think, for something that explores the effects of global warming, environmental justice kinds of issues, with what happened with Katrina there, the race dimensions of all of that. Again, it's very preliminary, but the earliest discussions are around having it focus on those issues. It's in part because there's enough stuff there on the ground that we can experience and see that makes it real rather than abstract. That said, stuff happens that we don't anticipate, so I want to say that's what the initial thinking is right now.
Very much in line with that response comes a question from Anita Lee at First Unitarian Universalist Church of Richmond, Virginia. We need to support congregations who are working to become anti-racist congregations. Will the UUA support bringing back Jubilee II anti-racism training?
There are a number of anti-racism programs and training and workshop possibilities available for people. My own personal, and I think that's a good thing. I don't think we should have one way of doing it because it's not always developmentally appropriate for a congregation. Congregations are in different places, groups are in different places on that. And let me add something else. I'm a great believer, and even more so now than I was 10 or 20 years ago. And I say this as someone who's led probably as many workshops as anybody in here. But there's a UU pattern of thinking that a workshop is the response to every, it's our default response to doing something. And workshops have their place, but around issues of justice and those kinds of issues, there's so much to be said for something that's experiential as opposed to simply cognitive. I mean, I've seen it in the congregation I serve with delegations going on human rights journeys, and everybody returns a human rights activist for life because they've seen it. And you could have had 20 workshops on the same topic, and they wouldn't have had the sense of the importance of that. They wouldn't have had the personal connection with it that they have. So one of the things that I'm really happy to see that's going on are things like the College of Social Justice, things that give, and I really believe it's important for our young people especially and ministers in training to have those kinds of experiences with marginalized people and those communities because it will affect them for the rest of their lives. So Jubilee trainings are one resource that we have, but they're only one of a whole spectrum. Let me say here that there's something, and heaven knows I have been guilty of seeing the glass half full and things that need to be done, and it goes with the job. But once in a while, we have to remind ourselves of successes we've had. I was just a couple of weeks ago at a gathering that's given, the name of it is Finding Our Way Home. And it's a gathering of ministers and religious professionals and seminarians, people in training of color. When these began about 15 years ago, it was 12 or 15 people. We all knew each other's names. We sat around and did check-in, that kind of thing. There were between 70 and 80 people at the last one. We had to totally change the way we do it and the way we fund it because there's been an explosion of ministers and religious educators and musicians of color. They're really having an effect on our movement. And we're living at a time where we're watching, seeing ministers, particularly of color, being settled in very prominent parishes across congregations across the country. This is a huge advance for us in the last decade, and we should celebrate it. In fact, I understand that tomorrow Clearwater is about to call so I mean, that's one sign. You know, a decade ago, there were hardly any ministers of color serving mid-sized and large congregations in our movement, and now, I have to tell one other quick story. I've done either installations or preaching at congregations that have called these ministers, so I really want to support that. And I love the little side conversations you get into. And I got pulled aside by somebody on the board of trustees of a congregation that has to remain nameless. Worried that someone is going to steal their new minister. It was a minister of color because this person was so terrific that they didn't know how long they could keep this person. I thought, yes. That was a real sign. You know, we didn't hear that 20 years ago.
Thank you for the shout out to Clearwater. That's my home congregation. And the next question actually comes from me, and it's in
You
keeping.
didn't put yours first. That's
It's in keeping with the idea that as we expand our clusters from those that are simply based on geography to clusters that are based on common issues and needs of congregations that may be physically far apart from each other. What are your ideas for the best ways to build trust and strong, effective relationships among individuals who may never really see each other in person?
First of all, what I found, because I spend a bunch of hours a week having very intimate conversations with my computer screen, with people on the other side, whose images are there, that, boy, this is it's changing very fast as our habits change and our technology changes. Just in the last few years, the fact that the resolution is better and the sound is better makes it seem more real. That said, it's easier to maintain relationships that are long distance electronically than it is to create them. And so when at all possible, I think it's important for people to have a certain amount of time together and it simply takes time to build trust in relationships. And that those can be then sustained over time using the technology. But boy, I also see that so much of it has to do with what we're used to and the way our habits change. I have 2 grown children, but they're 12 years apart, and they use technology very differently, each one. It was like there are these generational shifts. So what is totally normal in terms of maintaining relationships for my daughter, who's the younger one, is something that's still kind of strange for me. She's done this so much that to her it's normal in the way it isn't for me. So I'm sure this is going to change, and we just have to be sensitive. Is it working? And if it's not working, what adjustments do we need to make?
Our UUA Board has committed to linkage directly to congregations under our new regional structure. The example of linkage given on the Southern Region's website appears to have consisted of a survey sent to congregations. Please assure us that linkage that preserves the congregational voices will not consist solely of our GA delegates and an occasional survey from the UUA Board. And that question is from Scott Cromer at Buckman Bridge UU Church in Jacksonville.
Well, a couple of things. First, I agree with that, and I don't speak or control the actions of the UUA Board of Trustees, so we'll be clear about that. But the board knows that. The linkage is a complicated thing, and surveys are one tool that ought to be part of a big tool chest in order to do that. It can't replace more in-depth conversations around issues. It can't replace bringing together stakeholders around certain issues. It can give you kind of a quick snapshot. And I can't resist adding here, I'm someone who's very skeptical of most surveys, simply because I know enough about surveys that they're often a very bad sample and a superficial sample of the opinion of any group. Unless you ask the questions very carefully, unless you have a large response. And actually, I see congregations misusing surveys all the time, getting a small response and saying, well, 75% of the people, wanted X. Well, it was 9 out of 12. That's not 75%. That's 9 out of 12 who responded. And the fact that it's a small response tells you, I'm enough of a social scientist, that it's not a representative sample. So maybe we ought to talk to some more people and get a more in-depth. So yeah, surveys can be used, and they're only one way, and none of us is so enamored of them that we think they can replace something that's more of a dialogue with people.
I would think that a part of that is additionally making sure the delegates, our congregation sent to General Assembly are well informed and communicate with their own congregation about what's going on.
And this, for me, is linkage. I mean, one of the things I'm very aware of and have been that, when I was serving a congregation, I had a sense of the pulse of the congregation because I was talking to people all the time. It's much harder as president of the UUA to know what Unitarian Universalists are thinking. The electronic indicators of that, I'm sure, are not representative. So what's happening on social media is one indicator, but it is only one, and it's a constant challenge for all of us.
So we asked about General Assembly in New Orleans, but we've had another question come in. What exciting things are in store for this year's General Assembly in Portland?
Was that a member of
I don't know who asked that
staff?
question.
Was that a shill asking that? And if not, I should have planted that question. Oh boy, there are a bunch of things. Cornel West is the Ware lecturer, and given everything that's happening in the world, he's someone who's been a real advocate for some time, and that'll be a challenging one about dealing with the whole issue of race and marginalization. And he's someone who he's a Beacon Press author, by the way, and who's done stuff on the work, a real student of the work of Dr. Martin Luther King. So that's an exciting piece. Has anyone been to General Assembly in Portland or to Portland, Oregon? It's probably my favorite site for a GA of all the ones I've been to. It's a wonderful place. It's a wonderful venue. Portland has this wonderful transportation system. It's a super GA, so I really encourage people to go. And there's part of what I like about General Assemblies, this one's going to be a big one, is that there's a different quality to the big ones. There's a different energy to when we have more than 4,000. I think we're going to have 5,000 or 6,000 people in Portland. So it's a real special event. So that's there's going to be a lot of stuff around other justice issues, around climate stuff there, and the usual spectrum of terrific workshops. The other thing that's happening that Jim Key in the board, Jim Key, the moderator, has really worked hard to reshape what the plenary sessions are, and again, make them more relational and less just people presenting things. And one thing that's always frustrated me at General Assemblies, we'll have these topics to discuss. We have the pro and the con microphone. So who gets to speak are the people who race to the microphones in anticipation of, and we spend time with a bunch of people on the pro side saying exactly the same thing, and a bunch of people on the con side saying exactly the same thing because they don't know what each other was going to say. Then we take a vote, and 98% of the people vote in the way we knew they were going to vote anyway. And I'm thinking, boy, was that the best use of time together? So I kudos to Jim Key for working with other members of the board to really trying to change the nature of those times together and make more time for other interactive stuff and workshops at General Assembly. So I think they're getting better and better.
Sounds exciting. Thank you. This is a more general question, less around our changes in our relationships, but perhaps related to that. As a denomination, are we growing, shrinking, or standing still? How might we do better?
Oh, boy. We are, and for folks who were here, I talked about some of this yesterday. So let me put what's happening to us in a context. The number of people who are affiliated with no religious institution and have no religious identity has exploded in the last decade plus in America. I call it a mass migration away from normal organized religion. And this is true of evangelicals, it's true of reform in Judaism. It's true, it's a huge cultural shift that's happening. So in that world, in a world where United Church of Christ and Presbyterians lost a quarter of their membership in 8 years. We're staying about the same. We've gone down last 3 years, 1% a year. Before that, we've gone up. So we're about where we were a decade ago. Most religious organizations, denominations would love to have those numbers. I don't, because I think we have an upside potential that nobody else has. And the national numbers always, in the way of aggregated statistics, are both true and misleading. Because what we have as a movement are congregations that are thriving and growing and engaged with their people and their communities and really healthy. We have a group of congregations that are kind of steady in terms of the membership and the number of people they engage. And we have congregations that, for complicated reasons, are in decline. And they about offset each other and have for some time in our movement. The growing ones kind of offset the ones that are in decline. But if you look at the average, it doesn't tell you anything about any individual congregation. So when we have, and you can look around in any district, in any region, and across the country, we can see that pattern. So the real challenge for us is how do we have to do two things. How do we make our congregations a bit better, more engaging, more fulfilling for people? It's about doing what we've always done and doing it better. And we've got to find new things to do and new ways to engage with people. We've got to do that simultaneously. So that's what's about that I've called Congregations and Beyond. It's about what are new ways to engage with people for whom church is not part of their lives, and they're not like looking for liberal church because they're not looking for anything, and yet they want community, they want to make a difference in the world, they want some depth in their lives, they want something that's beyond the banality of consumerism, but they don't automatically see Sunday morning and church as the way of doing that. So how do we create? These are our people. How do we engage with them and find a way to invite them in, and also us going out? It's not just about waiting for them to come to us. How do we learn how to reach out effectively in this time? That's a real challenge for us, and it's a fabulous opportunity. It's a fabulous opportunity. So there's a lot we could be doing and doing better, and I'm anxious to see. I'm seeing a lot of bubbling up of stuff, and I hope that we're agile enough and committed enough to seize new opportunities and to find things that work and really reinforce that and do more of it. So,
thank you. For Anna Bethia from the UU Church of Tallahassee asks, making sure that we realign our vision and strategy for growth in the future requires a lot of complicated and sometimes painful administrative and technical changes. How do you see us as a faith movement taking care of ourselves on an emotional and spiritual level as we move toward a vision of the future?
There's so many parts to that question. One, I would push, if I understand it correctly, I want to gently push back. I served a congregation, I was blessed to serve a congregation that grew from 400 to over 750 members. And it did it, the reason for that change wasn't anything technical, even though we did some technical stuff. It was we really started paying attention to the people around us and made it a practice and a discipline to do it. And you know what? It changed us. We became a more welcoming and loving congregation when we started paying attention. And that's not a difficult thing. That's really kind of a neat thing. And we met a whole lot of fabulous people in the process of doing that. So I don't want people to think that growing their congregation is this traumatic, awful thing. In fact, it's fun, to use a technical term. I mean, it's a lot of fun. One of the things I learned was that the hard way, the way I usually learn things, is when I talked about growth, it was usually the wrong conversation. Because I found people who were, growth means change, and that's going to be uncomfortable for me. But if you talk about being more welcoming and engaging in new people, oh, well, that sounds good. That's a good thing. And if you focus on that, then what you end up doing, if you do it well, is grow. And then when you grow, you deal with the fact that it's a little crowded, and maybe you add a second service, and you do all these kind of technical things. But the technical things never lead you to the growth. It's really the spiritual and the openness and the awareness that leads to it. So growth is a measure. Growth isn't the goal.
Thank you. Our final question, we have about 2 minutes left.
I'll talk fast.
Okay. Comes from Mary Alb of the UU congregation in Asheville, North Carolina. What is your hope for the next year in the life of our denomination?
Oh, boy. I hope that I've been privileged to see what Unitarian Universalism can become and can do. And my hope is that more and more of our congregations and our people move into that and realize that and grow into it. So it isn't yeah, sure, I'd love to raise more money and do all those other things. But I've used a little shorthand. What we need to do, I believe, as a movement culturally are three things. We need to get religion, which is really take ourselves seriously, and we need to grow leaders, and that involves actually allowing leaders to lead and not hamstringing religion. And we have to cross borders of class, of race, of culture, and ethnicity. If we do that, if we pay attention to those core values and living those values, we'll be just fine.